So warm welcome to boards as drivers of corporate renewal and sustainability. Please meet Cecilia Widebeck West, Board Impacts Forum Operations Director.
Good morning, thank you. And I first want to provide you with a little introduction. Boards Impact Forum is the Nordic chapter of Climate Governance Initiative in collaboration with the World Economic Forum. And we want to engage board directors in the Nordics and internationally so that we can accelerate climate actions and innovation for sustainable business and a sustainable world. Next, please. And this morning, we're going to discuss boards as drivers of corporate renewal and sustainability. After this brief introduction, we'll get a presentation of research. We'll have a brief poll and a moderated discussion with the panel, and then of course we'll conclude. And we appreciate if you can share on social media, and if you have questions, please send them via the Q&A function. And then I just want to tell you a little brief thing about Boards Impact Forum. We run webinars such as these, and the previous ones you can find on our website, where we also have blog and some research and tools. We have started to do some peer-to-peer group exchanges, and we'll continue with those. And our aim is to make sure that we have impact using the World Economic Forum climate governance principles, but we apply them to the full sustainability scope. Today, we have the panel, of course, which we will introduce shortly, but I also want to talk about you, the audience. We're from a total of 30 countries, which is great. Approximately 70% are from the Nordics and the rest from the rest of the world. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Liselotte Engstam, who's also the chair of Boards Impact Forum.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And I will go on to directly introduce our first presenter, which is Mats Magnusson. Mats is a professor at KTH in Sweden and at Luiss in Italy. And he holds a PhD in innovation and a Master of Science in Industrial Engineering. He also speaks Japanese, if for any Japanese people want to talk to him. And he has been a visiting professor at Bologna and Aalborg. He is a chairman of the Continuous Innovation Network. He's an advisor of one of the top innovation journals, and he's the co-founder of the Association of Innovation Management Professionals in Sweden. His research focuses in innovation networks, strategic management, and board's contribution to corporate renewal and sustainability, which is also published in a number of magazines. And he's also a leader of a number of international leadership programs in Europe and Japan and China. Warm welcome, Mats, and we're delighted to have you.
Thank you very much, Liselotte, for that somewhat lengthy introduction of myself. I'm a professor, but I do really enjoy seeing knowledge being put to practice. And that's why I'm very happy to be able to present some research results here that hopefully can be taken directly into the boardroom and put into use. And this very brief presentation I will give here, only 10 minutes, actually will cover research that I've done in the last 4 years, very much together with Liselotte. It's been an exciting experience to work to someone who really knows board work. And of course, also with Ludo, Professor van der Heyden, and our younger colleague, Fernanda Torre. We have in two larger Vinnova-funded projects studied what boards can do in relation to corporate renewal and innovation, how they can bring that closer to their way of working with strategy. But in the later part, this has very much also come to deal with sustainability. So based on a lot of interviews, workshops, and two larger surveys, we have actually tried to propose a framework for how boards can address these very big and challenging issues. And we are right now finalizing a book, which hopefully will be out soon. The tentative title is Governance of corporate renewal, innovation and sustainability. And why are we doing all of this? Well, basically that's a rather clear thing, because if we look at, for instance, the global risks outlook, we see that there is a lot of uncertainty in the world. There are many risks. We have, of course, in the last 2 years, last year and a half, all been subject to the pandemic. But there are many other things that influence businesses and our personal lives. And we see, if we look at the top 10 list here of which they are, of course, some of them are pandemic related, but we also see that there are other aspects very much related to sustainability related questions, environmental issues that we see, the climate change going on, and digitalization. And we also see that at the bottom of this list, we see that some firms do not really feel that they can cope with this. There are challenges in terms of succession and how they reach talent, but also that they do not manage to actually change their operations and their business models at the pace that is needed. And asking companies a little how they deal with innovation, we see that after the pandemic, or at this late stage of the pandemic, we can take the next step there. We see that companies react very differently. Some companies have increased their innovation activities, some have more or less the same amount have decreased. So probably they have very different possibilities to cope with the situation. We also see that very much of a focus, both in strategy and innovation, starts to deal with sustainability. That is really the topic once we're out of this urgent mess that we have with the pandemic. The big challenge is, of course, the sustainability question and the climate change. Next, please. Now, how can boards try to address these big challenges? How can they actually become better at helping the organizations they are set to guide? We do not expect boards to come up with innovations to deal with it. The board's responsibility here is to create the right conditions for innovation and renewal in the companies. And we have seen that there are 3 really important capabilities and some key actions that actually the board should deal with. Very briefly, and this is basically the core of what we propose in our work, is that boards need to address these 3 areas. First of all, it's about sensing, and that's basically about understanding the changes. And this is, of course, a huge challenge, given that the changes are faster and sometimes more disruptive than they've ever been before. So really, we need to actively scan the external environment in all its aspects, in terms of geopolitical changes, business changes, technological changes. But of course, we cannot scan everything. We're all human beings with limited perception and limited cognitive abilities. We cannot see it all, we cannot think it all. So our suggestion is that what we really need to focus upon are the key things around us, and they are very much related to our purpose. So by using the purpose as a guidance, that is when we can actually see if something is really relevant for us. But then we need a clear purpose, and we need to actually actively work with the purpose and the changes in the environment. The second area here is a more discrete and concrete things. It's pivoting. It's about making the decisions that actually change our direction. And this, of course, is something where we really need to consider both the risks and the opportunities with possible innovation and also sustainability-oriented actions. And what we see also is that some of the traditional ways of working with strategy in boards may be a little outdated, but actually in a world that is rapidly changing, strategy has to include quite a lot of innovation. But we also see that innovation, as it sometimes happened before, it trickled up through the organization based upon a good idea somewhere, is difficult because of the pressure we have and the pace we're working with everywhere. We need to make innovation more strategic and strategy more innovative. We need to bring these 2 together, working with our strategy and innovation portfolio side by side, so that we actually make sure that we take the decisions about this as a comprehensive whole. And in the end, when we are actually renewing and innovating, we also need to make sure that these things fit with what we already have. One of the aspects here is, of course, to not overdo it or to put too little emphasis on innovation. We need a balance between short and long-term value creation, very much related to our resource allocation. And that's, of course, a matter for the board, but also in how we measure, follow up and govern the overall activities. We often have very clear objectives and measures for some of our strategic initiatives, but for innovation, it may be a little more immature how we actually follow up and measure innovation. But we see that there's great progress in this area. Next. Yes, just to point out one of the findings we have in our research. We have run 2 large global surveys, and the first one actually confirms our model. We tested this model, and it's actually very nice to see that we can conclude that these activities, these capabilities matter. Companies that are better and more active in sensing, pivoting, and aligning in the end perform better. What we also see is that sensing, pivoting, and aligning, they build upon each other. It's a chain of events. And of course, no chain is stronger than its weakest link. So that means if we do not sense, we should not expect that we will actually be able to pivot and align in the right way. And actually sensing stands out as maybe the most important and most challenging part. And the final conclusion here is, of course, that innovation is really driven by our capacity to sense new opportunities and act upon them. That is what drives innovation performance. However, if we really should also see the whole picture, we also know that innovation is costly sometimes, which means that there is a direct negative effect between spending a lot of money on performance right now. But the good news, in the long run, if we manage to align this, we actually get higher firm performance from being able to work with all these 3 things. What we've done finally is we have mapped this model or this framework onto the World Economic Forum governance principles for climate and sustainability, because of course we see that a lot of the innovation opportunities here are really related to sustainability. And in the later survey that we have run in our project, we actually did this, and we saw that here actually, even if we think that there is a huge potential for improving innovation and the way boards deal with innovation, there is perhaps an even larger need to actually address sustainability, innovation, and strategy together. We, for instance, see that almost half of the companies responding to this survey have not yet integrated sustainability into their strategy in a good way. Next. And in this, we see that if we go down to the details, there is still a lot lacking when it comes to goal setting for sustainability and evaluation. And also the way we should deal with this. 60% have not really discussed how they should deal with sustainability in terms of which committees, for instance, should be active or how they should actually bring it up into the board. And if we look at an overall level, we see that taking innovation, strategy, and sustainability as one comprehensive, challenging area, we see that approximately 50% they don't feel that they actually sense in the right way. And also around 50% feel that they're not good at pivoting in the right way. They do not really take balanced risk. And more than 50% actually admit that they have much more to do when it comes to balancing short, long-term value creation and actually have a good way of monitoring their innovation activities and their innovation culture. Now, finalizing this, of course, as I mentioned initially, my interest is that this is not just something published in a journal, it's that it actually becomes something used in a boardroom. So what we have put a lot of emphasis on is actually collect good board practices, informing about how other organizations actually work with this. And we see that we have a range of different practices for all these 3 areas: sensing, pivoting, and aligning. And just giving some examples, we have a very long list of this in the coming book, and I think we will hear other examples here from the panel. I'm looking forward to that. But we see that we can, for instance, increase training and education for board members. In some countries, that's very well done, in others, not at all. But we can also engage young people in our organizations to address strategic dilemmas and present those dilemmas and opportunities. We can also use much more, put much more emphasis on using scenarios and analyzing ecosystems, and actually change the board agenda so that we spend enough time on future issues like innovation and also, I would say, sustainability. And finally, really that we think about, for instance, our key performance indicators for how we align, how we bring together innovation strategy, and how we follow up our sustainability activities. But as I said, this is just a teaser when it comes to the number of practices. We have collected very many companies have very interesting practices. And I'm looking forward to hear more about that during the panel here. So thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much, Mats. Record speed, well done. Now we are very interested in getting your perspective. So Cecilia, can we launch the survey? Thank you. And the survey includes first a question on which of the 3 action agendas will be most important to improve at your board. The others relates more to 2 sustainability points. The first one is if your board has adjusted your business strategy to the SDGs and a higher purpose. And the last one is around, has your board had detailed discussions on how you need to adjust your board processes, potentially committees, etc., and which should address what to include sustainability. Now, we'll keep that open. And meanwhile, I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you the rest of our panel. Which consists of Luisa Delgado. Welcome. So Luisa is a chair and NED, also investor and entrepreneur. She serves as a non-executive director at IKEA, at Fortum, Telia, AOL. She's a chair at Schleich and a vice chair at Barclays Bank Suisse. And she has got 36 hours every day, as the rest of us. She's an international leader with a very interesting background, latest as CEO of Safilo. Prior to that, she was with SAP and a long stint with Proctor & Gamble. She holds a Bachelor of Law and a postgraduate diploma on European Studies from Louisiana in Lebanon. I'm also delighted to introduce Ludo van der Heyden, who is the founding director of INSEAD's Corporate Governance Initiative. And he was the co-director of the International Directors Program that has taught several thousand board directors by now. And he was also the co-director of Modern Governance in Banking. He advises on governance and leadership, team dynamics, innovation. And he's a chairman himself on C-Square. He's an advisory board member of Bensis Capital Partners, and he's a former independent director at the board of Naftogaz. And prior to INSEAD, he taught at Yale and Harvard, and he has been a co-dean of INSEAD. And finally, I'm delighted to introduce to you Asthildur. And Asthildur is currently a partner at Frumtak Ventures, and she is a chairwoman at Kaptio and Controlant. And she's on the board of governors of the University of Iceland. She has extensive board experience as a long stint as chairwoman at Marel and a board director at Icelandic Group. And she has a background from corporate development and corporate banking, and she has an MBA from Rotterdam. Now, can we see the results of the poll before we start? So just for a short comment, we can see that It's slightly more challenging with sensing and pivoting, but still a lot of people have challenge with the aligning as well. We can also see that about half have adjusted their business strategy, which is very similar to what we found in our research, but the rest still have a lot of work to do. And on the last one, if your board has discussed on how to work with this, about 40% agree, and the rest still have some fun discussions to do on the board. So thank you so much for that, Cecilia. If I can start with asking Asthildur, if you give your comments kind of first a bit very shortly on the poll result, but primarily what is your experience when it comes to the board innovation renewal, and if you can just give us a quick feedback on that first.
Thanks, Liselotte, and the poll results, yeah, I think they pretty much mirror what we see and hear, and we've all seen research that board members are struggling with even kind of grasping the real positioning and strategies of the companies they are serving. So that's quite scary. But I wanted to touch upon the concept of sensing, which was introduced, and I think it's such an interesting concept, very kind of descriptive, and I was thinking of it both in terms of individual sensing on your own, kind of, and sensing together as a board, or together as a board and a management team, and I believe you really have to focus on both. For the kind of group sensing, I have had some really good experience from using offsite, the offsite board meetings, and for example, visiting key customers, sensing what kind of challenges they are facing and discussing how we could better serve them. I've found that such discussions can be really enlightening, both when it comes to opportunities for incremental innovation, adjusting and improving the services we weren't aware of, and also sensing potential disruption that wasn't on the board's radar. Mm-hmm. We have also scheduled some kind of inspirational input from other industries or technological leaders. So I particularly remember an offsite that we had in Seattle, where we had the opportunity to visit Microsoft and their digital labs, and we got to try out their virtual service. So I was repairing a motorcycle with some virtual equipment, and it was really enlightening to experience that in person and together with the group. I mean, this was technology we knew that existed, but when you kind of together really experience it and sense it, then it opens up your mind in a different way. And this was with a board that has around 40% of its revenues from service and spare parts in a manufacturing business, has a global service team all over the world. So this kind of joint sensing experience made a big difference for us in what kind of steps we took following this experience. Mm.
Very interesting and very enlightening that also the board members need to go and experiment and try. So let me go over to Ludo. And Ludo, if you can come off mute, we would be delighted to hear your perspective first, a couple of minutes. Just what is your experience, both from your own situation and also from what you see working with so many boards?
Yes, I mean, I'm in sort of, I've been in 4 sort of important boards, and I would say that for me, the most difficult is sort of the pivoting, is sort of the committing to the decision. That's been my personal experience. I'm not saying that's sort of the experience of everyone, but that's been sort of the commitment. And pivoting is not just changing the thinking, because that is still sensing. And I think Asthildur had a very lovely description of a sensing event. But I think sort of actually making the commitments and starting to prepare the future, I think would be my experience as the most difficult one. The aligning, I think, in a certain way comes a little bit as a necessity afterwards. You can still fail at it. You make the wrong decisions, which is you don't integrate the results, you don't change the organization. But that's the aligning is more about the management of change. So that's sort of the way. And I think where I would join Asthildur is that if sensing is not just sensing in that sense, we sense, but we also sensing is actually building the awareness that leads to the commitment to pivot. And so in that sense, you could argue that it's a systemic model, which is that the failure of pivoting might also be because the sensing was too superficial.
Thank you so much, Ludo. And then let me turn to Luisa, who has phenomenal experience of transforming companies yourself. But also now sits on some very significant companies and some that also needs to change a lot. So what is your experience in terms of these areas and any examples that you point to that you find valuable?
Yeah, I found it very, very interesting to actually start thinking about the model of board capabilities, as opposed to just the board should do lots of things, but structure is important to then drive the board capability and own development accordingly. So I think the model and the methodology in itself, I think, is very useful. The second point is, I actually think quite a lot can, in terms of this methodology, be learned from board assessments. We need to get away from doing board assessments as a ticking the box exercise. And there are even very expensive consultants who do it that way, and that's not worth anything. What actually the board assessment would be is in itself a renewal opportunity of reflection for a board on whether really we are able to systemically sense, distill, and extract actionable insights from there, how we pivot and how we really take decisions and assess risk and opportunity. And then finally, as I think Ludo said, aligning is actually, in my view, more of a mechanical thing. The best sensing that I have experienced over the years as a board member and also as a CEO, enabling my board, is about, for example, home visits. At IKEA, we go to China, we go to India, we go anywhere, we go to the US, and home visits are part of what the board does to truly get close to our customer and to the many customers and people of this world. The other one is engaging with employees in a way that is not so structured. And again, IKEA example would be front store days, that every board member goes 3-4 days per year and actually works in a store incognito. We do our best. I do my best to serve meatballs, which is not as easy as it appears. But what you pick up in that context, both on the culture, on really how the values are lived or not, and the customer, and what's really important, I think, is invaluable if, of course, you are then in the boardroom able to reconnect. There's another board I sit on where just yesterday we had 4 hours evening school, okay? And we regularly do evening schools with management, external, us on topics. And again, not surprisingly, sustainability and digital, of course, are front of the thing. Now, just to conclude on the sensing, and then I give it back to you, Liselotte. Sensing is only possible if you have a board with people who are not technically limited. And I want to explain what I mean by that. Often we choose board members, and I sit on enough nomination committees to know how we look for, that particular skill. And it becomes so narrow and so deep that actually you fail to recruit personalities who are able to sense where the world is going, as opposed to where their narrow specialism may become even narrower and more specialized. And I think that's a really important point on board capability.
I think it's super interesting that you bring that topic up, because many of the board members have historically been chosen for what they know before, not what they are prepared to get to know. which is probably something that we need to put up a recruiters webinar, Cecilia, to discuss with the headhunters. What are they doing to help us on this topic? But if I go down into one thing, I know one thing that we're struggling with on some of my boards, and that is, how is strategy changing, and what you need, what you think it needs to change to, and how do you work with strategy? And Mats, maybe I wanted just to start with you, because I know you actually have a lot of experience in this.
I would thank you very much. I would first of all come back to what I said in the presentation, that's in most organizations, but also that innovation needs to become more strategic. Having worked for a very long time with innovation management at a more operational level, I'm frustrated to see that sometimes great efforts actually do not actually result in anything because the conditions were not right. So that's the first thing, actually seeing these as a joint whole. But the second one I would like I think I would like to highlight is the process of strategy. That also here, I think we in many organizations have an outdated cycle that follows, of course, the reporting and all the routines we have built up. But in a fast-moving world, strategy needs to be there all the time. Things can change rapidly, so it has to be a continuous process, an iterative process throughout the calendar year. And I think that actually requires that we change the way we deal with it in the board agenda. I
think that's super interesting. So let's hear. Yeah, go ahead, Ludo.
If I can add to this and underline that the simple model actually tries to force boards into a habit where strategy and innovation are integrated. I think that's what it tries to do, so that it's not two different topics, and that when you're actually doing sensing, you're not actually, first you could interpret, as the model says, that you're already doing strategy, because you can't commit to something that you haven't sensed. And I think what the model tries to do is to get out of the cycle where you basically get and say, we need to change because because of pain. So most people say people change, when there is pain. And I think what the model tries to do is, the pain is the result of not sensing enough. And this is where, you need to touch small differences. And I will finish with a great example of sensing. I'm Belgian, so I have to come up with Belgian examples. But InBev, for example, there's nothing as simple as beer in a certain way, because beer technology hasn't changed for 2,000 years. So, but the InBev board, certainly when I was meeting it, would actually go and have every board meeting in a different country. And then the first day, they would just sense. They would go into a store, they would say, and they would meet the store manager. Then they would go into a pub, Heineken pub, why are you ordering from Heineken? What's wrong with our, have you told, etc. And if you do this, as a routine 10 times a year, you really develop a sense of the market. And I think, and then you meet the local management, and then you ask some questions. And if the local management doesn't answer well, that's a red flag. And they're not very kind in that sense, which is they're actually quite tough. So what I'm saying is this model actually allows you to do everything, and the sensing is really the long-term activity, the long-term strategic activity. What's coming? What are the storms? What are the opportunities? The pivoting is the medium-term agenda. What kind of results do we expect in the medium term in order to maybe change the strategy in the term. And then the alignment is actually the short time. What do we need to change today, and align and give up and increase in order. So you have this, at the same time, the model looks at the three fundamental dimensions of strategy and innovation. So I think in that sense, the model is very simple, but if you do it, I think you do start answering these questions, which I think boards struggle with. And frankly, there's still boards who think innovation is not part of their mandate, So of course, these boards do not have to worry too much because they won't be alive very long, So there's going to be a little bit of Darwinian selection.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ludo. I wanted to tweak now the strategy question into also sustainability. How do you make sure that you include all of the new interesting risks and trends into the strategy? And how do you balance the risk and opportunities? And I wanted to ask you first, Asthildur.
Okay, yeah. I guess we all have experience with, you know, the kind of annual risk sessions that many boards have, with lots of focus on mapping the different risks and mitigating actions. And then we always say yes, and then of course related to risk, there's opportunity. But we don't focus, I think often we don't focus on really taking the time to discuss those. So we know that it's a hugely important topic, but do we really take the time to discuss it and work on it? And we keep on discussing also the huge opportunities related to sustainability. And there are discussions about the trillions of dollars of worth of business opportunity related to that. But do we take the time to really have a discussion on these opportunities and what they mean for the company, and what kind of innovation and renewal is required to explore these? And I have a good experience from having to changing a risk session to a risk and opportunity session, where we actually did like a 50-50 on the timing. So when we had done the risk part, the usual, you know, and put a check in the compliance box, then we turned kind of the coin around and said, okay, now let's focus on the opportunities related to these and to the sustainability issues we're facing. And it was a fascinating exercise. And I think it's, as with all these issues, it's about taking the time, putting them on the agenda, because, you know, if you don't plan for these, then they don't happen.
Thank you. Very interesting. I wanted to turn now to Luisa, because it's, you can always say, because both of you, or all of you actually, work both kind of with smaller startups, but you also work with these behemoth companies. And some of those behemoth companies have been actually very recognized for being able to change their strategy along the lines with sustainability. And I wanted to hear, Luisa, because you sit on some of those companies, how did you do that? How do you get the sustainability to be really part of the strategy in that sense?
I want to answer that, and then I want to also share the example of private equity from a value creation perspective of sustainability. But let me address your question, and maybe making the link can help us a bit to reflect. I think, and it was said before, that sustainability really gets into the strategy and becomes part and parcel of the trade-offs and the choices if it's integrated in the purpose from the very beginning. So it's not a separate thing, but it clearly is part of the very purpose of the company, and therefore permeates the business strategy totally, and is not an element that we also do. And some of the big companies, interestingly enough, have had a purpose from their inception that has been to either serve society or lead in certain aspects of thinking, whether you think about energy or you think about telecoms, which I'm sure is the two you were trying to address here, or think about IKEA from its very inception. There was a philosophical ambition to serve the many of this world as opposed to the few, right? And that from the very beginning, and to do so in a way that would be enduring, value driven, etc. So I think, as interesting as it may sound, you know, the startups have obviously a almost from its origin, you know, you have sustainability purposes and objectives that are today part of any kind of startup. But I think the real interesting thing is, how do you take a traditional, big, long-standing company that clearly has to transform itself, mainly driven by technology and probably consumer focus, etc., But how do you go back to their origin and say, but actually you were born to serve society? Could we use some of that as we transform ourselves with a sustainability purpose at core? So I think that's extremely interesting, and actually perhaps a missed opportunity in some of these big companies that have to transform. That's certainly one thought. I think the other point that is also quite interesting here is, we should think about sustainability in the ESG framework. We think a lot about climate, which is really important, and we all know. But there is E, there is S, and there is G. And I think it's only the combination of all, particularly also the social component, which is incredibly important when we think about stakeholders. And, ultimately behind every business, there may be only a B2B, but ultimately even B2B is about the C. Somebody at the end is the end consumer. And the end consumer ultimately is society. And as a consequence, there is an innate responsibility to understand societal inclusion and other elements that come into this. And I think we shouldn't miss out on that when it comes to purpose and when it comes to the strategic integration of E, S, and G as well in the governance part. I'd like to end with private equity. My most interesting experiences over the past 2 years on the integration of sustainability in strategy has been, is ESG a risk component and we manage risk, or is it a clearly identified, tangible value creation driver in a private equity project, an asset, an investment? And it has only become interesting when we have been able, for example, in the toys of Schleich, to identify ESG very, very discrete and clear value creation drivers. And then I think, it becomes, much more than just a defensive kind of game. It becomes a game that, thinks, for example, in the social component, value for whom? Is it just value for a few? Is it value for the many? Education, becomes a totally different thing. Materials becomes a totally different thing, and supplier management, right? And how you really hold suppliers and sub-suppliers responsible for certain standards, etc. I think we should all, as boards, really be sure that we make that balance between risk, heavy on opportunity, and then are clear on the value creation KPIs and how we manage that performance and hold our management and ourselves accountable.
Right. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to something around that. But first, I wanted to ask Cecilia if we have some questions from the audience that we should bring up.
Thank you. Yes, we do. And one of them is how boards can help monitor and guide the company to be more agile and actually have more speed in the transformation that all companies need to go through. And
when you picked your strategy, your innovation, how do you get it?
How do you actually make it happen and fast enough, basically?
Right. So who want to go first on that? Ludo, can I ask you?
Yes, I'm going to give the model's response, which is that actually it's true. It starts with sensing. So how can you guide? It's very hard to guide if you haven't done serious sensing. And I think, there were some great examples, by Luisa in terms of, these learning events in the evening or these visits. So, and then finally, the second one, and that's where it's becoming more concrete, is the pivoting, which is you actually start some innovation projects, you prepare for switching, you prepare, because a strategy has to arise around the pivot, and the pivot is sort of what you do. So I would say the model tries to really answer that, and that is the purpose of the model. Now, so that would be my quick answer. I have a quick comment, which is that sustainability is a very, for me, fascinating world, because of course nothing is sustainable, right? We'll be one day older tomorrow. And in 100 million years, the sun will be red and no longer yellow, So, and of course, the materials are being consumed and not replaced. So sustainability is part of a dream. So I think that's why people are so excited about it. However, one should never forget that if you want to be sustainable, you will not maximize profit and you will not grow. If you're growing, you're reducing profitability and you're not going to sustain because you can't grow forever. So I think what I want to say is going upwards. You have to realize that sustainability is about others. It's about society. And profitability and growth is about you, the company. So sustainability is a different way to start setting the stage for strategy discussions. And in that sense, it's not an end. It's not profitability and growth. It's actually saying sustainability is the criteria, and profitability and growth are actually consequences of sustainable strategies. But actually, most strategies won't sustain because we need to be agile. But then the final comment is that agility by definition is not a strategy, because you can't commit. Strategy is commitment, and you can't commit to agility. If I marry once, I'm going to be strategic. If I want to pick up partners, you know, I go from bar to bar. I don't need a strategy. Okay.
Love your examples, Ludo. Thank you so much.
Trying to make it concrete in a way that everybody can relate to.
Yeah, it was very picturesque for us. I know, Asthildur, that you worked very hard in one of your companies actually with implementing both sustainability and agility. Can you share anything about your experiences from that?
I think what's been discussed on ensuring that sustainability is really integrated into the strategy is crucial, and that your investors, they understand that, and that when they're investing in the company, they're signing up for that. They're signing up for a commitment to long-term thinking, signing up for a commitment to, for example, investments in an innovation. So on that side, and from ensuring agility, it's important for the board to really commit to these things and ensure that the prioritization in the organization and is aligned to that commitment, and that you're not always, you know, changing hats on focusing on the short term targets you need to achieve, and then the long term. You need to have like a consistent story towards the organization if you want to really get results on this.
Thank you so much. Let me turn to Luisa, and what are good ways that you see that we can follow the progress on sustainability and strategy without maybe being chased by the legal issues on reporting, but how can we more proactively as boards follow the progress? What do you see there?
Well, you know, I am a big believer that you get what you measure, right? And even though sometimes it's painful, particularly when you have to first decide and align around KPIs, but I am a big believer on being very clear on, you know, a strategic framework that includes clear measures. And then in a management process that is operationally led and supervised by the board at less frequency, but supervised by the board in terms of understanding not only the numbers, but the why behind either gaps or when it's right or when it's ahead, in a way that the performance review becomes a discussion on why, as opposed to just here are the numbers and we tick the box. And then it becomes a learning exercise on how to really move forward. And the emphasis here is on the word learning. I think all of what we're talking requires a learning culture, and the culture to put oneself in question as a board with management on progress and evolve, and also get people deeper in the organization to come and explain their progresses or their struggles in the progress. And then I think this can become both very hard numbers, but the software behind it on the culture that then underlies it. That's the experience, and it works in a context where there is trust. That is another very important operative word here if you really want to make deep progress, as opposed to just superficial, another reporting exercise. We have too many of those anyway.
That's very interesting, and trust, you really need to find a way where people can also fail sometime, and not just run everything to perfection. I know, Mats, you have some views also on this topic.
Yeah, Liselotte, before Mats goes, maybe
sure.
this is to be underlined, which is if people learn, I can trust them. You see, the problem is if they don't learn, then I have to start monitoring them. And L'Oreal had this beautiful saying, which is you can fail, but you cannot fail twice for the same reason. And I think that's sort of a learning attitude, which is it forces you to learn.
Thank you. Mats?
Yes, I would like to add on to the previous comments here on measurement and how we follow up things, and also agility.
Whoops, I think we lost you, Mats.
And maybe we sometimes do not really highlight learning enough. I first of all think an important thing is to consider the indicators we are using, that we are using enough leading indicators and not only lagging indicators. I personally like to propose an even more detailed framework where we measure input, throughput, output, and outcome. Because if we only measure at output and outcome, we see things in the rear mirror, and it's too late to act. And in order to be agile, I think we need to look much more on the early phases of our investments and our development, looking more on the input and throughput. And I think really to push both innovation and sustainability, we need indicators that are also leading us to experiment, and that we follow the experimentation, because that is really when we can learn, not when we have run something all the way and we can conclude whether it was good or not. The learning should take place early on. So I really think that changing the way we use indicators will promote both more agility and also more focus on the right things when it comes to innovation and sustainability. So a different setup there.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we'll start with some of the summary recommendations. And if you think about other boards that needs now to start to be much more engaged in renewal and sustainability, what would be your recommendations? Do you want to start, Asthildur?
Yeah, I'd like to just really simple, because I think it many times it really boils down to this. I mean, at least for me, if I don't put things in my calendar, then they don't get done. So we need to plan for this, and we need to put it on the agenda. I think everyone sitting on a board, they know the importance of this, and that we do need to address it, but still it doesn't really get put on the agenda. It isn't prioritized, and there isn't sufficient time to really kind of dig into it. So that would be my primary recommendation. Put it on the agenda.
Yeah, thank you so much. Shall we go to Luisa? What is your recommendation?
I agree with the agenda, so I want to elaborate on that, but fully agree. I think hire people on boards who are interested and capable for such reflection. Don't hire functional experts only who are there only for depth. We need breadth as well, and this requires breadth with enough depth to be credible, but not single depth and then a sum of board members whose sum of depth would create breadth. Every individual needs to have enough breadth to engage in this.
Super good, thank you. Mats, what is your recommendation?
Well, I would say that first of all, attention is our most limited resource. So really making sure that we spend enough time on important aspects, just as highlighted before. There's one more thing that we haven't mentioned perhaps, and I think is important, and that's related to our purpose, but also to our strategy, that when it comes to innovation sustainability is to have really clear goals. And that may seem a little paradoxical to some, that we should have clear goals for innovation. But actually, that is what we see in research is if we have clear goals, we prioritize these things. It doesn't mean that we have to have goals about exactly what should be the outcome. It's about what we should do, what we should strive for, very much in relation to our purpose. So I would like to highlight that, but don't be afraid of actually having clear goals for innovation or clear goals for sustainability.
Thank you so much. And then Ludo, can you help us with a bit of summary and your recommendations as well?
Well, yes, my summary is sort of, there used to be sort of a statement, greed is good. I think that's sort of my finance colleagues at INSEAD say this. I think we're past this. So I would say frustration and ambition is good. So frustration about, not solving problems and frustration about not having enough impact. So I would say that's a key ingredient for innovation and change. And I think you can't have impact without strategy. So I think that is I think the first comment. I will encourage everyone to read Dick Rumelt, who's a former colleague, went back to UCLA, who basically said there's no strategy without challenge and opportunity. So I think it's you really have to commit to the challenge and then learn to change the challenge into an opportunity. So if people are frustrated, that will not get away. And that's what we now see, that sustainability is actually a good way of doing business, because it does give opportunity if you catch it enough. I think that would be for me the key issues, and then get away from optimization, this is my comment on if you go for sustainability, you will not have maximum profit, you will not have maximum growth. So it is a change in goals. That's where it's I think the key issue. I think I will conclude by saying in the model you don't see execution, you don't see oversight of execution. And I think that's the purpose, which is boards have to be more strategic. They have to spend more time on sensing and on pivoting and on aligning, and sort of assume, that execution is being executed. That sort of, if that is the major issue, then you don't have time for innovation because you're micromanaging, etc. And then finally, the check the boxes. I mean, that's a lack of ambition. That's a lack of a learning culture. That's basically saying I'm satisfied, and in a certain way, check the boxes made boards too comfortable, and comfort kills effort. So I would say these are some of the thoughts. But I really like the examples of sensing that were made. I think we didn't have that many examples of pivoting, like new projects that we're undertaking. But I think good sensing will lead to that. And then I think if you do good sensing and if you do good pivoting, then I think aligning will be sort of, as I think it was Luisa said, it more a mechanical exercise. And if you're a good board member, you will do that. Again, when is the right time to pivot? There is no right time. There is a wrong time not to pivot, but there is no right time. So I think the mindsets of boards are changing. That's, I think, what is the most exciting. It could be that board members are the people who need to learn the most. And we have Arie de Geus, who says the surviving companies are the companies that learn the most. And now I think what we're discussing today is that the surviving companies are the companies that have board members who learn the most and the best and the fastest. And that is a completely different view on board membership.
It certainly is. And I want to thank you, but I'm also going to leave that over to Cecilia. So Cecilia, welcome back in.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Luisa, Asthildur, Ludo, Mats, and Liselotte. Super interesting discussion. I also would like to thank the audience, of course, and our board and committee. And since we work on a very special sort of business model, we are dependent on sponsorships and grants. I'd like to thank our partners, FCG, DLA Piper, Prime Webber Shandwick, but also our board networks, Swedish Academy of Board Directors, the Directors Institute of Finland, Styre Institute in Norway, Scandinavian Executive Institute, Boardman, and Board Network. They're all fantastic. And then next, please sign up as a member supporter if you're not already that. And COP, of course, COP26 will start this weekend. So the next webinar will relate to that. We'll talk about implications on financial flows after COP26 on 23rd of November. And then in December, we're planning to have a webinar on how the increased pressure for ESG reporting will impact boards. And internationally, we have a range of interesting webinars coming up relating to COP, and you can find several of those on our website. So thank you all, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Asthildur, Luisa, Ludo,
Thank you.
Matt, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cecilia, if you stop the meeting, I think you need to stop the meeting.